This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Up here in the Northeast, we are trying so desperately to get through this winter-ish, northeastern-ish like conditions. But in the NBA, you know it's forever staying hot. Just like my man, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who's always coming in with the hot mic. What's good, my man? How are things down there in sunny South Florida?
You know, we got our little cold snap, so we don't have the sun here for us. It was a cool 55 this morning, so no comparison to our Bridging up north, but for us Floridians, it was a little brisk. So got my hoodie on here today, and we're making it work.
I mean, my God, I can just see the icicles in the background.
I'm sure. Listen, I know better to complain, to my New York and New Jersey brethren. But at the end of the day, trust me, my Floridian wife was like, "This is too cold." So
we would be a little salty, just a little bit.
Yeah. Perspective. It's all perspective.
All perspective. Anyway, fresh off of the, if you really think about it, as we're recording this show, we're about 3 weeks into the month of January. So, we're past the major cutouts of the NBA's, schedule, so to speak, right? I think with the last one still left to go would be NBA Rivals Week that's taking place. And look, short of anything, man, this season has been a pretty remarkable NBA season. There's a lot of parity. I think you can make the argument that while teams display or have the best record in the NBA, by no stretch of the imagination is anyone running away with it or definitively staking their claim that they're going to be the team to beat. Now, by all accounts, you can make arguments that with the top teams there, they could look like the most complete team. But I really think that as we get down towards the dog days of the schedule remaining, we get on the back end of the NBA All-Star Weekend, I think we're really going to see whether or not teams have properly evaluated their roster and have chosen to go the way of we want to be buyers or we want to be sellers. I know we're going to have that conversation at some point, Shaw, but I do think that it's pretty remarkable that even at this particular stage, some teams have already pulled the trigger early. We'll talk about that in a second in our news and notes, but already have seen themselves saying, we got to make a move now. We don't want to wait until trade deadline comes, and we may have to ante up a little even more, or there may be very little as far as picking from the crop of available assets that are going to be out there.
Well, what I'll tap in here on this when it comes to NBA trade talk right now, I applaud moves that get done a little bit early instead of waiting to the crack of the last minute of the NBA trade deadline, because that allows you to integrate your player a little bit faster with more time into the system, get that practice time, all those things that happen. The trade deadline was moved up some years ago to be pre-All-Star. So then during that All-Star break, those guys who do get moved would also have that training time or that practice time. But I just think, again, if you're definitive, that's what you want, go out here and make the move. We often criticize like, oh, that move would have been there for them later on if they just would have waited. But for teams that have already made the moves, they were definitive about it, and I applaud them for doing that. So my only caveat to that is I wonder now, because these are two pretty sizable moves, one team being involved in the two biggest moves, if you will, in the Toronto Raptors. So is there going to be a little bit of a letdown as we lead in here the next 3 weeks of the trade deadline? Is another big name that's going to be out there? And, for us as podcasters, media type, we want to see, all right, what's the big splashy name? But sometimes, as you alluded to, it might just be the tweak that needs to be made. The things on the margins for especially those contending teams, not necessarily a big star or all-star player that needs to come into their roster to shake things up.
Listen, I'm not trying to toot my horn. I said, the move a couple weeks ago with the Knicks acquiring OG Anunoby, I think is a great move for a team like the New York Knicks. I don't think, like right now, we're talking about it in the immediate effects of the wins, losses, but the tangible aspect of a team like the New York Knicks and its ability to go out and make legitimate moves and trades, I think speaks volumes, because too many times you see too many organizations shooting for the fences and not doing the right type of move that really helps elevate, and you can clearly see whether or not on a long-term basis it was worth going through it. And we're going to talk about this Indiana Pacers trade in a moment, with them acquiring Pascal Siakam, and whether or not in the grand scheme of things this should ultimately make them, contenders. This should catapult them to be among one of the top teams in the NBA. And I speak on this not because I'm calling out any media people, but a lot of the top media heads have already staked their claim in saying this should instantaneously make the Indiana Pacers legit contenders. We'll get into the whether or not that is or isn't true. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be true. I'm just saying, can we pump the brakes a little bit? Because a lot of the things that we've been talking about, of the good and the bad when we're dealing with a Pascal Siakam, can very easily permeate in the team's ability to be able to play against the top-ended competition, not just in the Eastern Conference, but the Western Conference as well, too. So we'll get into all of that. And then later on in the show, Shaw, we got to stake our claim on the midseason awards. I know everybody has been opening up, the banter a little bit about who should be claiming those midseason awards. You know how we do. We like to do an interim report card style.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Call out the grades on this one. So we got a great show lined up for our people as far as where we are with not just the NBA, with some of the moves that's been happening already, but also giving some mid-season awards out, delegating the proper interim report cards, for what's been happening. So good show on tap. As always, get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Lead. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Go to www.baselinenba.com to check out this show and all of our other shows. If you're catching us on YouTube, we say hello to all of our viewers. And if you see the nice blue and white logo on our screen, that means we're with the 19 Media Group. The 19 Media Group be running the content streets. So not only us, but also the plethora of great shows that are out there, headlined by the 19 Media Group, whether it's music, culture, entertainment, sports. You got it. You want it. We got it for you. Go to 19mediagroup.com. Check us and also the great family of content creators and storylines and shows that are out there. Shaw, I think you had something you were about to prolifically enunciate on.
No, not at all. I mean, I think as always, what the baseline does here on a week-to-week basis is try to provide you the butt of good, as you like to say. And, I think that's going to lead into not necessarily our next topic of conversation, but something we've been talking about here for the last couple of weeks, in essence. And for us, it is the final week. If you'd be so kind, if you could dig into your pockets, pull out your cell phones, and would you vote for the baseline for the best basketball podcast and sports podcast awards? As always, we've been talking about this here for a little while alongside our label mates with the Gimmick Infringement podcast. They are nominated for the best wrestling podcast. All you need to do is go to www.sportspodcastgroup.com. Look for the short list for the 2024. Look for the Baseline NBA podcast. We will be the far right corner when you're on the basketball page. Give them a little information about your podcasting preference, vote, and then you're done. So there's no tricks to it. You're not signing up for anything. You're just, letting people know that you're registered to vote for us in that specific space. And we'd be so appreciative of your vote here. Voting ends on January 28th. So please, if you'd be so kind, and tell a friend to tell a friend.
Tell a friend and a friend. And you know what I'm saying? What did our boy Limp Bizkit and Method Man say? All in together now.
Yes. I've been texting people left and right, all in together now.
Exactly. All in together now. All right, y'all. So let's get right into some of the news and notes taking place. Obviously, the big topic of conversation was the big move made by the Toronto Raptors and the Indiana Pacers. Now, the finalization of the deal added a little nuance to it because it also involved the New Orleans Pelicans. And I know you'll speak more to the numbers aspect of this and why it made sense in doing this particular deal. But obviously, Toronto Raptors have decided to move Pascal Siakam. The Indiana Pacers are more than happy to acquire him. And this is basically for 3 players and 3 future picks. So ultimately, the Raptors will get from Pacers, Bruce Brown, Jordan Noah, 2 first-round picks, 2024 first-round picks, and a conditional 2026 first-round pick from the Pacers. And then thrown into the mix is Kira Lewis-Villa for the Pelicans. And this is obviously for salary cap relief issues, which I know you're going to speak to. On its face, Shaw, winners and losers of this particular trade.
So, I mean, I think the biggest part is like who got the best player in the deal, right? And that's the Indiana Pacers. So they get a position of need in Siakam. In theory, a two-way guy. You know, I know you love that term so much nowadays. But in general, somebody who can score, who can defend, multiple wings, can even pass the basketball here a little bit as well, too, to not necessarily relieve Tyrese Halliburton, but give him another outlet and somebody else who can distribute the basketball. And I think the Pacers felt like, you know what is our chances now? We have this great basketball team that's a little bit unexpected. How can we put some accelerant on that? And that's what the Pacers have ultimately tried to do. So they're the winner, if you will, right now here today of the deal because they got the best player and Bruce Brown and 3 first-round picks. That'll probably, 2 of them will probably be in the mid-teens to late teens to early 20s. I think that's the cost of doing business. They could have easily become losers of this deal if Pascal Siakam doesn't resign with them this summer. And that's the biggest caveat that we have to wait to kind of end up seeing. Then you also need to see what those picks end up turning out to be in the years to come. New Orleans is just, as you alluded to, salary cap filler. So they more or less, get Kira Lewis off their books. He wasn't going to get any minutes in that situation over there now anyway. So they, dump that salary. And then the Toronto Raptors get a couple of picks. And multiple picks and a guy in Bruce Brown who they might be able to flip again or keep him if the so be, or for the rest of the year, decline his player option at the end of the year if they were so inclined. So to me, everything makes sense for where Toronto is trying to go here right now, building the team around Scottie Barnes. So in some ways, you could say it's a win-win for all 3 teams involved because the ones got what they need to do, get dump some salary. The Pacers get a 3 and D guy, but a power forward who is a multiple wing defender as well too. And the Toronto Raptors get an opportunity to build their roster for the now and the future as well too with all those picks.
Yeah, so it's easy to your point, Shaw, that the Indiana Pacers would wind up being the winners of this deal. I think when you look at it from an offensive perspective, this is a great situation because now Pascal Siakam is going to get more than enough opportunities to score the basketball. But I also wonder about whether or not there's enough basketball to go around when you have the type of player in Tyrese Halliburton and what you've been getting from, Mathurin and what you've been getting from Miles Turner and really the tandem of guys. I think, again, some trades I think look good if you are trying to sell the perception or the idea that the person that you're getting is going to address a lot of the deficiencies that are reflective for a team on the cusp of trying to win a championship or a team that you believe, within a year or so should be championship caliber. Said all of that. So if you guys were listening to me in the beginning, clearly you can hear a little bit of skepticism in me. Do I think that this trade is good for the Indiana Pacers or for Pascal Siakam? I am going to play devil's advocate and say no, because if you look at where the Indiana Pacers had already been, it's not a question of whether or not the Pacers can score the basketball. Sure, having Pascal Siakam gives you an option, a very viable option, and maybe he can easily catapult himself to be the second best player. But it doesn't cure the fact that this team is going to be better defensively because of Pascal Siakam. It doesn't mean that this team, who basically is on the lower third of rebounding the basketball, having Pascal Siakam is going to help them do that. And so I'm just looking at it, he's not going to bolster your 3-point shooting percentage. You're already a top 10 team. So what I'm just saying is, Shaw, is from a talent perspective, absolutely. You got a bona fide scorer on that team. But if you're already a top 3 team scoring the basketball, you're praying that a lot of the things that you're hoping that he brings to the table can help offset. You're hoping that's going to happen regardless of whether you're doing it now, doing it later, or even if you try doing it at the beginning of the season. I want to see, this is more on Tyrese Halliburton and his ability to make Pascal Siakam a better basketball player, not the other way around. Because I'm not really seeing where Pascal Siakam significantly makes the Indiana Pacers this great team that all of the pundits out there are jumping out and saying, oh, it's going to easily put them in this top three team in the Eastern Conference. I still think the Miami Heat are probably better than them. I still think that that a couple of the other teams that are hanging around mid tier where the Pacers are might give them a run for their money. And the only thing holding it up is Pascal Siakam's experience in the playoffs. But I don't know if it's going to by leaps and bounds, because if that was the case, then the Raptors would have kept him right next to Scottie Barnes.
Well, let's just say this. I think when you are evaluating a deal, right, what you're looking at is, does it make the team better, but in what capacities, right? So is Siakam better than Obi Toppin? For sure. And that's who they're starting at the power forward position right now. So I think, as alluded to, not just thinking about the offensive side of the basketball, but what do they get defensively? Miles Turner can be an elite defender or elite rim protector all he wants to, but if they're getting beat at the point of attack all the time, well, then he's always having to leave, which is probably leaving drop-offs for his man, in essence, to score. Siakam gives them somebody else, at least in theory, as a resistance, on the wing, who can guard some twos, but a lot of threes and some fours as well too, and maybe even some fives, depending on the matchup. And that just makes their defense 1%, 2%, 3% better, whatever you ultimately think. So, well, sure, I'm not going to go with, some of the people that maybe you've listened to and say, yeah, they catapulted and now they're right below Philadelphia, Milwaukee and Boston. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but they're in the hunt, if you will, to be a middle seed somewhere in that 5 to 6 range, and all they really are trying to do is get above the play-in line. I think that allows them to do that. Then you get into the playoffs itself. Well, then anything can happen, right? Anything can happen, I think, at that stage. So for me, the Pacers are in a space where they know they needed to make a move, and I'm not poo-pooing it yet in any capacity. I think I will poo-poo it if Siakam, like I said, he doesn't stay for the majority of his next for basically for his next contract. If he says, all right, thanks, it was great, but I'm out.
That's a big ask, right? That's a big ask, and it's almost kind of like that quiet handshake. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, we got a deal. Wink, wink, nod, nod. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of this, and it's probably a good thing that Rick Carlisle is the head coach for the Indiana Pacers. A lot of this is going to be the relationship that Carlisle does have with Pascal Siakam. Because if you really think about this, Shaw, I think Carlisle has to incentivize or boost the incentivization of this deal by having and maximizing Pascal Siakam as best as possible. You know, some guys naturally are great and you could just plug and play them anywhere, right? Look at what the Toronto Raptors did when they got Kawhi Leonard. They literally said, you do whatever you want to do, but who would question him? He is really responsible for 2 championships for the San Antonio Spurs, right? So he comes over, and while you got this young team, Kawhi Leonard, they all basically rode his shoulders as they went on to win that NBA championship, right? You were thinking that would translate to what Pascal Siakam, when the keys were handed to him, the moment that Kawhi Leonard ran off into the sunset to the Los Angeles Clippers. And I'm not questioning that Pascal Siakam is not a quality player. He is definitely, in my opinion, he's a top 20, high-end 25, but I'm saying top 20 type player in the NBA. But it's not consistent. And the same criticism we give for guys like Anthony Davis, we give the same to Pascal Siakam. That is the reason why the Toronto Raptors, I believe, moved on from him and said, we're going to build around Scottie Barnes. Not to say that they don't believe in him. They just believe more that Scottie Barnes, at his rate right now on the rookie deal, they can definitely see the versatility. They can see the leadership. They can see the high end from him than waiting around for what they were still getting from Pascal Siakam. So I'm just saying that, like, you remember, you're not automatically getting that from Tyrese Halliburton, right? Look how long we had to wait to see the promise of SGA. You may have that same type of uphill ascension with Halliburton. What you're hoping is that he can permeate that through the rest of those guys. So Siakam, in many respects, I think sits in that fold a little bit, where he's going to need the Carlisles and the Halliburtons to sell him that this is the best opportunity he has for another successful, not just deal that he's getting playing for the Pacers, but the deal for him to get that bag that you're talking about.
Well, the Pacers, they understand what it is for them as well too. It's the cost of doing business in a market that, while the town loves basketball itself, it's not maybe the most amazing place for NBA players from a destination standpoint. So yeah, do they need to pay to get somebody there, indoctrinate them into the proverbial culture and say, hey, yeah, we can do this? So where Toronto was at is, do we want to pay Pascal Siakam $45 million to be a glorified number two that maybe really isn't, is kind of miscast in that role? While Siakam will probably be the number two in terms of points per game in Indiana, I think there's some question about, all right, are they going to take a more wider lens approach at kind of their team building, their chemistry with Halliburton as a clear number one, the clear number one, Siakam, Miles Turner, maybe they even switch off as terms of like who's taking that secondary scoring load from Halliburton on a regular basis. And then you got Mathurin, and Nemhard and Jalen Smith and all those other guys. They still kept Obi Toppin, and that was one of the biggest things to me. They didn't have to give up any of the young guys. Bruce Brown, nothing, again, very good basketball player, good complementary role player, but they didn't really give up too many young guys any young guys in that deal, and they can still either keep those guys and continue to develop them or move them on if they feel they need to get a net upgrade at some point.
And I completely agree with you. I do find it a little interesting that they obviously looked to upgrade at the expense of basically telling Obi Toppin, at best, you're going to be a role player.
He got screwed. I mean, Obi Toppin might not be the biggest fan of this deal from his playing time standpoint. I'm sure his agent is like, hey, we brokered a deal, got him over here, whatever. But I don't think he's performed. I don't think he's performed at the level that maybe Indiana was hoping. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having conversations about we need an upgrade at the power forward position. So Toppin may or may not be on the move at some point, but he's definitely going to have to earn minutes here now, barring injury. As is Jalen Smith as well, too. Just falling kind of off of a cliff there. They get spot minutes, but not doing a whole lot with them. But again, between Nemhard and Mathurin and all the young guys that they have on this team, Indiana is pretty well stocked in essence to kind of be an irritant, if nothing else, here in the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. More news and notes as we keep things going on. NBA rivalries, Shaw. Yep, man, it's that time of the year.
Your favorite time of year.
Yeah, totally. You can see the smile on my face. Okay. So we've now basically come to this point where we have to sell people on the idea that rivalries actually matter in this modernized version of the NBA. And so, we got some quality games that are on slate. Knicks take on the Brooklyn Nets. I fail to see where there's really a rivalry there. Lakers take on the Clippers. Again, show me the rivalry. Until these guys are actually playing in the playoffs, show me the rivalry. But hey, we're marketing the idea that it's Rivals Week. So what are you so most looking forward to NBA Rivals Week? Not day, but the week.
Yeah, I mean, what they do is basically, it seems like they've leaned into more so last year's playoff matchups and saying, okay, these were highly contested series, with the exception of the New York and LA situation, the city versus city, in intra rivalry, if you will. But for the most part, it's a copy and paste from some of last year's playoff matchups, or even 2 years ago when there was some potential, consternation, if you will, and beef. You look back at the Phoenix and Dallas situation when Booker and Luka Doncic had some issues, where the case would be, all right, cool. Then Dallas and Atlanta becomes a rivalry only because of the Trae Young Luka trade stuff from years ago, but I don't think anyone's really talking about that anymore. So that one is pretty lazy on, if you were to ask me. I see they got Philly and Denver on there trying to get the Embiid Jokic thing going. Those matchups have been really good the last 2 times we've seen those guys play, but I don't necessarily know if that they're rivals other than just the 2 best centers in the NBA. So I guess from that standpoint, I get where they're going. If there was a one miss, it's interesting that Milwaukee is not on here in any capacity, but maybe that's a credit to the Miami Heat, since basically everybody's in the top of the Eastern Conference probably has something against Miami in some capacity. So the Knicks get the call here. But I think, a Bucks Miami would have been a better situation than seeing the Knicks in Miami. But again, the Knicks played Miami better in the playoffs last year than Milwaukee did. So hence why we get that matchup.
Bro, this damn week is all over the place, man. It is so all over the place. And this is again I hate being that dude, but maybe this is good because this is part of the reason why our show is become as successful as possible is because I'm the man of pessimism, right? Like that. But I just cannot stand this. This is why if you're the NBA used to be the driver of this, right? Where the teams themselves dictated to you exactly, not all of the social media nonsense, not the Twitter, not the it was the games and the teams that drove the perceptions of what we consider rivalries. You know what I'm saying? Now it's because there was beef last year between a couple players, or they try to bring back, you know what I'm saying, old school versions of what's considered a rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
All over the place. The narrative should, and again, this is the reason why you take baby steps. I'm holding you to the thing that you said to me, Shaw, earlier about the IST, right? This was the first year of them doing it. They obviously are going to go back to the drawing board. They're going to take a lot of the criticisms that were thrown out there, and they are going to look to improve. Okay, if I'm going to use the NBA Rivals Week as a quote-unquote example, you know what I'm saying, a chalkboard example of the NBA going back to the drawing board and improving on this, I'm going to start worrying about the IST, okay? There are games on this NBA Rivals Week that just have no business being put together, okay? They just don't, and I think it literally takes away from the legitimacy of you generating the idea that there should be rivalries, not unless you're going to be true to doing it. So again, it's whatever it is, I'm going to enjoy. The thing I think that really gets to me, Shaw, is that the way that they've set it up is that the schedule itself makes it just doesn't seem to isolate the intent of the rivalry. It just still looks like a bunch of games being scheduled on the list. And they just decided this is the week we're going to label it NBA Rivals Week.
No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, but like the games do have to be played, right? So I think in some ways, like these games we play one way or another just because of how the NBA has to make the schedule. Everybody plays each other at least, 2 times, if you will. But I agree, there are some stuff that is like, they're just kind of shoehorning it in, or if nothing else, trying to establish a rivalry. And I think that's where, when you get into the semantics of, well, is it currently one, or is it something that could be one moving forward based on draft position, like with the Wemby and Henderson stuff that's going on here in this.
They should be flexing some of these games out, right? Like, listen, in all honesty, no
they
disrespect.
Still got to get played.
No, they still got to get played. But I'm saying, so what is it going to hurt? Like, for example, I'm going to give you a perfect example. The Oklahoma City Thunder taking on the San Antonio Spurs. I'm sorry, right? Chet Holmgren, and we'll have this conversation about Rookie of the Year and things of that nature about what I told you about Chet Holmgren. But that to me is not a game that's going to endear myself to love Victor Wembanyama or this perception of Victor Wembanyama versus Chet Holmgren. It's night and day, man. These two guys are on two different strategies about what they're doing to make their team successful. And I think what it does, it waters down the intent of saying we have a legitimate rivalry going on. It would be different if the San Antonio Spurs look like a competitive basketball team, but you can clearly tell that they're more focused about Victor Wembanyama's well-being than they are about everybody else, and everybody else does not know how to compete against the rest of the other teams. So I feel like it's a wash game for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I don't even know if whether or not the way that those two guys have played already, I don't know if whether or not it's really hyped itself up for me to be, this is something I'm going to be looking forward to for years and years and years and years to come.
Well, when the aspect of flexing it, I think you could just remove it from the rivalry week schedule. Like I said, the games still need to be played. So does it not become a national TV game? And as other teams are going to be playing, like the Bucks, as I mentioned before, are not taking the week off. They could be playing, 3-4 games during the week, so to speak. They just won't be considered part of the rivalry week.
You know what would have been a good rivalry
extravaganza?
If the Spurs played the Memphis Grizzlies, right? If people want to remember great rivalries, right? Back in the mid.
But that's a game you would absolutely need to flex now based on Memphis's disposition, if you will. Everybody's broken down. Nobody's even being
competitive game because both of the teams suck right now. They're not great. You know what I'm saying? They're not great. And eventually, if everyone's is predicting that the Spurs are going to be as good, hopefully in the next few years, I mean, this is a great opportunity to see what the Memphis Grizzlies have as far as young talent goes out there on the basketball court. I see it being more competitive and reminding me more of the idea of rivalry in the sense of when the Spurs play the Memphis Grizzlies, that's what you come to expect in a Southwest Division type situation. I'm just using it as an example, but that, again.
Well, I'm going to position the league to give you a call before they release next year's schedule and make sure we get the Game Face League seal of approval for rivalry week, and that will probably be like 3 or 4 games at best. So we can do that in one night. We don't need a whole week.
I need to come up with a stamp. I need a signature stamp. So it gets that stamp
like the Charles Barkley guarantee. I hear you.
Well, I can't do it like that. Can I do it in Jamaican?
Not everybody will understand that.
Let's put it like that. I might get shot. Like them yard man. They don't want to play with that dude. They're like, yo, get him off the screen. All right, Shaw. Before we get into our discussion regarding midseason awards, if people have been keeping up with the news that's been going on in the association, the untimely passing of Warriors assistant coach Dejan Milojevic. There we go. Milojevic. He unfortunately passed away a few days ago. This was during a road trip in which the Warriors were scheduled to play against the Utah Jazz. Obviously this is, a tragic passing. And it's really impacted not just the NBA culture. Obviously, he's a part of the NBA family, but also from a international perspective. Dejan's influence has been felt worldwide. Players like Nikola Jokic, Goran Dragic, a lot of these guys probably don't see their NBA careers flourish if he was not involved in their maturation process, in coaching them, especially during the Euro Leagues and FIBA World Championships. So, it's obviously a great loss altogether, Shaw. And, obviously it should be acknowledged, that the NBA community in whole of its entirety definitely felt the sting of losing Dejan earlier this week.
Yeah, there's not much more I can add to that other than condolences to his family, and obviously the entire NBA community, the entire basketball community that knew him. To go in such a tragic fashion, on a road trip, basically at a team dinner, if you will. It's brutal. And the Warriors were already in the midst of a pretty tough season in general, but death trumps all of that. Whatever's going on, they could be having a great season. It doesn't matter. Like, death can never come at a right time for anybody. So really, really sorry to hear about his passing. Understand even more so the impact that he had on the basketball community and so many international players who loved and respected him. So again, all we can do is wish our best and condolences to his family, the Warriors faithful as well too, and hopefully we can move on and live within his legacy that he's created.
And I just want to also add, Shaw, I thought it was a really class act that head coach for the Raptors, Darko Rajakovic, ran the very first play that the team ran was a play that he designed. Dejan designed, and I just, to me, like, it's those little nuances I think that really speak more to the internal brotherhood, in truly paying proper tribute and acknowledgement. I know we often at times, we use social media, we use all these different platforms, but I think in the game of sport, in the culture of the sport, these are those little things that, definitely deserve to be highlighted and acknowledged in our ability to appreciate how severe a loss it was, how tragic the loss was, and what it meant to, not just a player, but also an organization, a team, and just the community altogether.
Yep. Well said, my brother. Well said.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we're going to do our mid-season awards. We're going to discuss Rookie of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, Coach of the Year, MVP, and Most Improved. So you do not want to miss out. But first, are you ready to step up your style game without compromising the planet? Introducing an exciting partnership between Blue View Footwear and 19 Media Group Network. Blue View Footwear is renowned for introducing the world's first fully biodegradable and durable sneaker to lead a revolution in cleaner materials and manufacturing. Blueview has fully revolutionized the footwear industry. Their innovative plant-based sneakers are constructed of 100% biodegradable materials without sacrificing durability for environmental responsibility. Just visit bit.ly/Blueview19 and you'll see the ultimate collaboration of fashion, sustainability, and media excellence. As always, when you click on that link and make a purchase with Blueview, you are also supporting the 19 Media Group family and the baseline. So as always, go on there, get yourself dripped out, man. Springtime is coming around the corner, so obviously in the summertime as well too. So you don't want to miss out on some of the really fashionable styles that Blueview has to offer. And as always, anytime you make that purchase with that link, you'll be supporting the baseline. We will always appreciate you for your support. More baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw. Don't go away. We are back, Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and topic for this week on the show. We're going to be discussing midseason awards, interim report style. We're going to give those grades out, Shaw. Definitely weighing in on the selections for, the end of the year awards, seeing who really is in the runnings right about now, right? And obviously, it's a foregone conclusion to what we had discussed when we did our preseason award selections, right? As far as who we thought was going to be Rookie of the Year, who we thought was Sixth Man of the Year. There's a couple of guys who've who've catapulted themselves in the conversation that we didn't see coming, but that's just obviously, a product of them, getting turned up and getting down with this season and really making their presence known. So let's first start with Rookie of the Year, Shaw. No surprise here. Chet Holmgren, Victor Wembanyama, definitely in the conversation. Surprisingly, though, and I'm saying this as a person who thought maybe Scoot Henderson would probably be third best, maybe fourth, depending on his situation. Obviously, injuries has kind of hampered him a little bit. Jaime Vasquez Jr., man, out of Miami, is in the conversation, and Derek Lively out of Dallas are in the conversations. Two guys that I don't think we had as high up on our list of players to be in the runnings for Rookie of the Year, but certainly have made impact for their teams respectively, and has helped them to be successful in both the Miami Heat and the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a two-person race at this stage. But if for some reason Chet and Wemby weren't able to get the minimum games played situated, then that would probably fall to Jaime Jaquez over in Miami. Scoot is really on the outside. He's starting to play a lot better here more recently. Portland has just been ravaged with injuries, including Scoot himself. So the opportunities have been a little bit inconsistent, I think, in that aspect. But in general, Chet and Wemby are the leaders of the pack here. And some people are treating the Rookie of the Year race a little bit like the MVP conversation. Is like, well, how much is this rookie impacting winning? And I don't know where you stand on that. And I can't remember if I've heard this conversation before. And I'm sure we have, but it's just not kind of ringing a bell. It's like, all right, well, I've always kind of looked at the Rookie of the Year as like literally just who's the best rookie. But because OKC's playing so well, Chet seems to be getting a little bit more of an edge than I would have necessarily expected coming into it, because he's on a winning team and Wemby clearly is not.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it. I do think that it's helped flip the script a little bit, but I do think, Shaw, if you kind of make the comparison from a numbers game a little bit, Chet's holding his own, man. I think a lot of it is overshadowed by the fact that we're looking at, points per game, but I'm also looking at the defensive metrics as well too. And look, man, Chet is allowing the Oklahoma City Thunder to be one of the more dangerous, well-rounded basketball teams in the NBA, aside from helping them win. So again, I would not be surprised if Chet Holmgren winds up winning this. It would more surprised me on what were the metrics that helped catapult him through, or was it because of the eye candy success that the Oklahoma City Thunder? I think that's more what I'm on. For Victor Wembanyama, I mean, he could basically just keep doing what he's doing, and I think his numbers will speak for themselves, and he'll just boat race everybody to getting it. But I do think that he could very easily accumulate empty calorie numbers, in a time where I think a lot of people are paying attention to what that translation means as far as winning games go, and whether or not Victor is really having that much of the impact that I think a lot of people are hoping to see, not in a sense of wins, but in dominance. You know what I mean? Like, is he going out dominating games on primetime television? Is he showing you that, or is he just kind of giving you a glimpse of what he's like in the future, which is great for the future, but for winning the awards like right now, I don't know whether or not that should mean that Chet Holmgren should be, kicked to the curb because of it, or Jaime Vasquez couldn't have an opportunity to even supplant himself in that conversation as we near towards the end of the season. So those are the type of things I think about when I see this situation unfolding between the Rookie of the Year.
I mean, again, with the Rookie of the Year race, it's again, it's a matter of preference for me. I picked Chet going into the year. Wemby has been better than advertised, I think, in a lot of ways as well too. But he's had some ups and downs. I think even with the offense and are the Spurs looking for him or getting him in the right positions to be successful, and those things can get ultimately highlighted, especially when the Spurs are losing at the clip in which they're losing at, while Chet is kind of riding high in OKC. Second, third option, whatever you want to think that he is there. Either way, he's an integral part of what they're doing on the winning side of the basketball.
Absolutely. All right. Sixth man of the year, Shaw. Interesting that we have the selection of guys. Obviously, Malik Monk, Jordan Clarkson, no surprise there. But Bogdan Bogdanovic and Tim Hardaway Jr. I find it interesting, Shaw, a little bit, because you would think that with Bogdan Bogdanovic, with the way things have been with the Atlanta Hawks, that they would have probably have moved him maybe to the 3. And I know that they're using DeAndre Hunter, and they've got Murray, and they've got Young. So it's easy that he's someone that comes off of the bench. But if I'm like Quinn Snyder, I probably would have thought at desperate situations, given the struggles that the Hawks have exhibited, to have him reinserted back into that, that quote unquote starting role. But the fact that he's in there just obviously says he is so much needed for that team, despite everything that's going on. And with the rumors about Dejounte Murray possibly being traded, who knows what that's going to translate to. But the Tim Hardaway scenario, Shaw, really helping to upset the apple cart a little bit here. I don't think anybody saw the kind of season that Tim Hardaway is having this year coming from him.
Right. It just moving to the bench, he could have been easily be construed as a malcontent. He's embraced the role. He's gotten a couple spot starts here too with some injuries that Dallas has had, but he's been laser focused, shooting the 3 ball well, and trying to play defense, at an acceptable rate. But more importantly, is that he's just been so consistent for the most part with that 3 ball, giving Kyrie and Luka the outlet to a release point of view when they're driving and kicking. Like you said, didn't necessarily expect it. Not to say that Tim Hardaway isn't a good and capable basketball player, but I think he's having a really, really stellar year coming off the bench, and might have found a new niche for him, I think, moving forward.
Might have. I will say, though, that what's also benefited him are the struggles for Malik Monk and for Jordan Clarkson. I know that for their teams respectively, like I think, a lot of people were expecting more from the Sacramento Kings, but Malik Monk has been kind of slow out the gate for this season. He's starting to come on as of late, and he's certainly going to be in the runnings. And depending on what's going to happen to Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik might actually, reinsert himself as being the GOAT, the top dude, so to speak, for that race of the 6th man of the year. Jordan Clarkson, it's been such an up and down season with the with the Utah Jazz. And it's just interesting because I think we were saying that these are the 2 dudes, and who I'm forgetting one other person. Snap. But anyway,
Well, my original pick was quickly in the beginning of the year, and now he's got moved to Toronto as a starter.
So now he's a starter, right? Exactly. So it's interesting how everything has kind of played itself out. But again, Tim Hardaway Jr. being in the mix, didn't see that one coming, not a mile away. Coach of the Year, Shaw. I find this one to be probably the most interesting conversation to be had. You've got some really solid names here. Mark Daigneault, Chris Finch, Rick Carlisle, Joe Mazzulla, Jamal Mosley, Tyronn Lue. I mean, if you can make the argument, why not, Mike Malone and what about, who am I thinking of? Nick Nurse, right? So there's been a lot of, and this is why the season's been so dynamic, right? Like to see that we've already named like 7 names and not even a couple more who have significantly good records being in that conversation really speaks volumes about the turnarounds that some of these teams have exhibited.
Yeah, I think when it starts out west, OKC and Minnesota just catapulting in the way that they have, would be hard pressed to leave those two teams off of this situation at this stage of the season. Boston, obviously, with Missoula, he has looked better, although Kendrick Perkins called him a bird brain more recently. So we'll throw that to the side.
Just flat out foul. I mean, that was just so wrong. It's just so
it was
wrong.
an interesting situation for sure. And again, the aforementioned Pacers, Rick Carlisle always does a great job, has that team playing. And one of the things we didn't even mention when we were talking about the Siakam trade earlier is that the Pacers have recognized that they've needed to improve their defense. Over the last 15 games, the Pacers have been 17th, right? And that's better than 28th when they started the season and 26th where they currently rank overall. But the last 15 games, they're 17th. So if you get to the middle of the pack, and that's all Carlisle recognizing, like, hey, this was all fine and good, scoring 140 a night, but we're giving up 150. So we've got to figure this out, and they seem to be on the right pace here now. So I like Carlisle in this mix here for Coach of the Year. And the Orlando Magic, while they've cooled tremendously since their hot start, that's not to take away from what Jamal Mosley has done there on the sidelines.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I feel like in many respects, this is Daigneault's race to lose. So we're at the midway point. Let's see whether or not the second half of the season for the Thunder bolds as awesomely as it has this first half of the season for them. The Joe Mazzulla's thing is, to me, is very interesting because you can make the argument that the Celtics could wind up with the best record in, you know what I'm saying, the NBA if they continue to really stay consistent and boat race through the rest of the Eastern Conference. I think Joe Mazzulla's influence on Kristaps Porzingis and him managing him could be one of the few things that could catapult him in being in that conversation of being Coach of the Year, despite the vitriol coming from Kendrick Perkins, right? But again, I think a lot of this again is going to come down to how will the Celtics look in the second half of the year, and what will their records be a reflection of? I think with Chris Finch, he's going to be right there in the mix, and I think it's a back and forth situation between him and Daigneault. Albeit I like the Oklahoma City Thunder more for consistency than I am seeing from the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm just waiting for that shoe to drop on the Timberwolves where they just they run into a snag, and they run into some tough times and lose certain amount of games and they kind of, I don't want to say fall back, but they definitely don't keep up, so to speak, with the Oklahoma City Thunder and with the Denver Nuggets in that regard. And I think with the Clippers and everybody else, I just feel like I just don't know whether or not the Minnesota Timberwolves can hold. I buy the fact that they are definitely not pretenders. I think if they legitimately can play up to the level of what we've been believing about them, definitely. But I just don't know if they can hold this all season long. I feel like they're the type of team that could easily burn out or flame out and run into some tough times on the back end, which may cost them some games.
Well, a lot have been made about their run here in the in the Western Conference at the top of the conference. I think they're at the top here now for 50 something, almost 60 straight days, which they've had 10 days in their combined franchise history to this point. So this is definitely a new day, bolstered by their number one defense, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the last thing I'll say too, I think, listen, if the Clippers somehow get into a top 2 seed, and they seem to be on that trajectory, but that would obviously mean Minnesota, OKC. They'd have to pass all those teams, Minnesota, OKC, and Denver at this point. But Ty Lue and the Clippers are on a tear right now. So if I think the Clippers get up there, Ty Lue could very easily sneak in here. And sneak is probably too strong a word because he's a very, very good basketball coach. And I think the world knows that. But what they've been able to do here now with Harden into the fold, if they get in here into the top 2 or 3 seed here in the Western Conference, I think he might leapfrog Daigneault or Chris Finch, but that remains to be seen.
All right. Defensive player of the year. Speaking of defense, like you were mentioning before. So obviously Rudy Gobert, Chet Holmgren, OG Anunoby, Anthony Davis, Derek White, Bam Adebayo, Victor Wembanyama. All of these guys are in the mix. And this is a very healthy roster of players to choose from, or candidates to choose from, for defensive player of the year. I mean, look, Shaw, it's hard to argue Rudy Gobert probably being a front runner right now. But listen, what Anthony Davis is doing, despite the struggles of the Los Angeles Lakers, OG Anunoby, I think, he's been solid. I think there's going to have to be more of a sample size with the New York Knicks to see how much of that impact it maintains him in that conversation. But listen, this cast makes it definitely a tough call for who you think should be Defensive Player of the Year.
Right. I think there's numbers that stand out at you, like, okay, 3 blocks and 2 steals a game or whatever it is. I think Wemby's 3 and 1 point something, and then Chet's 2 blocks and half a steal. But it's not just that. It's what did they do from the defensive side of the basketball? What did they do in terms of the overall rim protection, deflections, all that? And that's where some of the wings like Anunoby, Derek White get into this conversation as well, because they're not going to have gaudy blocks and steals, or I think I think it's called stocks, from a fantasy standpoint, where they're combining steals and blocks or whatever, right? I think Mike Wallace was talking about that as well too. When you're stopping teams and getting defensive rebounds and not allowing the team to get second chance points, all those things counts as stops as well. All that can be considered, but I think right now the number one team in terms of defense, bolstered by the resurgent, Rudy Gobert. While he's not necessarily, we don't have like a comeback player of the year award anymore, but Gobert, if there was one, could or should be considered for that, because he was written off last year. And I know we got to wait to see what happens in the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. But he's bolstering the number one defense in the NBA right now. And as you alluded to, that part of it is not smoke and mirrors. But Chet, OG, Anthony Davis, Derek White, all those guys have a great case for this award. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I couldn't have said it better. It's to me, it's Rudy's to lose. You know what I'm saying? Ultimately, but these other guys, man, Holmgren, Anunoby, Davis, White, Adebayo. I think Wembanyama, is on the outskirts, because you just look at how much the Spurs struggle at times defensively as well too. And it's not on him. It's just that he can't do everything. But you would want his numbers to matter in the grand scheme of things with the type of talent that's already up there. This just may not be that year, but I definitely think come like maybe a year or two from now, Victor's name is the numbers will have some severe impact. And I think he's going to probably do some crazy stuff. Most improved. This one is a good one too, bro. Tyrese Maxey, Alperen Sengun. We were talking about him on Who You Got. Scottie Barnes, Kobe White, Emmanuel Quickly. Now, I think it's a 2-horse race. While Barnes, White, Quickly, certainly definitely deserve honorable mentions. Maxey and Sengun, man, they've been on like next level balling out, and it's just rightly so that if we have to actually not put them in conversations for like MVP, you know what I'm saying? They definitely are going to have to get this award, like one of these dudes.
Yeah, again, 2-horse race, similar to the Rookie of the Year situation here. Maxey just 26 a game or whatever it is right now, and Sengun just kind of being an offensive hub for the Houston Rockets in a way that, yes, we didn't necessarily expect that to take on, especially with Udoka coming there immediately. But that's not to dissuade, I think, the rest of this lot here who've been playing some really great basketball. I talked about Kobe White, I said a couple of weeks ago, with some of the more unexpected things. It's starting to really show now, even as you can see here in the odds makers, like even listening amongst this group, the way his handle has improved. His turnovers are slightly down as well. Obviously, the Zach LaVine injury has helped him grow, but he's a better individual. So if there wasn't a guy named Maxey and Sengun in this, he would have a legitimate shot, because I think Scottie Barnes, even as good as he's been, has started to slow down. And obviously IQ now, his role has switched a little bit too. So we'll see if he can still even garner some consideration for this. But Maxey and Sengun all the way, man. Those two brothers have been rocking out the entire season.
Absolutely. All right. And finally, Shaw, let's talk about it, man. MVP, right? Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic. Your young son, SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now, I know that the Luka Doncic pick right now is kind of a sympathy pick because, unfortunately, Luka's not 100%. But when he's on the court, man, he balls out. I just don't know if he can overshadow the likes of, what we're getting from Embiid, Jokic, and SGA, man. It's just pretty phenomenal. And I think this is the reason why when we have these conversations about the MVP, when, iron sharpens iron. And again, it's ironic because, we're talking about Doncic and Antetokounmpo because the last few years, these guys are always in the conversation for the MVP. And it's just a matter of, can Antetokounmpo, do the unthinkable that some of these other guys are doing? Or if you're Luka Doncic, like, when will it be your time? Because he can't sustain it throughout the whole year. Like, he starts slow and then he picks it up, and then he starts fast and then he slows down. listen, Joel Embiid is putting up all worldly numbers. Nikola Jokic is doing Jokic things. The SGA conversation, Shaw, to me is the most intriguing because I think when you look at it holistically, what he's putting together and what he's doing, not just for the Oklahoma City Thunder, but just as a whole in his position, he has almost effectively replaced Steph Curry as the only legit guard, so to speak, that would be in that conversation, given the type of talent that's around him in comparison to the days that we were talking about with Steph Curry and the Warriors or Damian Lillard when he was with the Trailblazers. This could very well be SGA's time. It just sucks because he's got to leap over the Goliaths in Embiid and Jokic.
Yeah, well, SGA, I think just also because he's a guard in this conversation here that plays better defense than Luka does. Quite frankly, like there's no two ways about that. I think SGA's leaps and bounds better defensively, although Luka is a better overall creator and probably offensive weapon. But SGA is just he's phenomenal at what he does and commanding that. So I agree 1,000%. And I think if OKC can sit in the situation where they're still a top 2 team in the Western Conference towards the end of the year, that's going to make it very hard on the voters here to figure out who they want to give, because we know voter fatigue is real. And SGA can be that kind of new shiny player that everyone's like, well, you know what? Look what they've done. He has the resume. Why not go there? And not as a sympathy vote, but only in the aspect of like, hey, they think that he's earned it. And Jokic has gotten 2 and Embiid got 1 last year. But Embiid has been offensively just ridiculous. And you mentioned earlier about Nick Nurse and what he's doing on the coaching sidelines he's unlocked Embiid, and Embiid's passing at a clip that we've never seen before, like ever in his career. So to me, it's really, really difficult. And I will credit the media again, because the MVP conversation has not been as incessant and ugly as it has been in years past in terms of like it coming up so early. But as we get to that midway point, it's a great time to kind of start to take a look at that. And that's not to dissuade, I think, again, Luka or even Giannis, who's had a really great season in Milwaukee. Jason Tatum, is on the outskirts of this conversation, but has so much help in Boston, that he's not going to be able to get in here. And I think maybe he could catch Luka in terms of top 4, top 5 vote getting. But this top 3 is pretty solid to me, and Embiid, Jokic, and Gilgeous.
Yeah, all that Celtic chance about MVP stuff, man, that's just internal. That's just boosting up Tatum's confidence for when he actually has to make it count in the playoffs. Joel Embiid, if you're watching our show, and I hope you're watching our show, because it can definitely kind of boost up some of our listenership as well too. But if you're listening to us, feel free to thank your boy James Harden. You know what I'm saying? Because if not for James Harden doing what he did in the playoffs and creating all of that craziness in order to get for them to go out there and have to get Nick Nurse, your boy now, the dude that you were kind of, you know what I'm saying, kind of skittish on, you know what I'm saying, not really feeling. Oh, you feeling him now, right? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Go give him a hug.
It's National Hug Day. It's interesting that you mentioned that.
Exactly. Go give him a hug. It was National DJ Day the other day as well, too. I thought you were gonna go play Nick Nurse's favorite song right about now. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, man, like, look, I completely agree with you. I just think that what Joel Embiid is doing from a numbers perspective and also from a dominance perspective. And I'm going to say this because I wasn't afraid to say this, that Giannis was the most dominant player in the NBA a couple of years ago, and especially during the MVP, which didn't mean that he necessarily had to be the best player in the NBA. Right now, Joel Embiid is the most dominant player in the NBA, right? That doesn't mean that he is better than Nikola Jokic, because as far as I'm concerned, Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA. Giannis Antetokounmpo needs to figure out where he now finds himself in the pecking order, because that is going to have to be the version that the Bucks are going to need to re-catapult themselves in the conversation to be legitimate top 2 team in the Eastern Conference. So if Joel Embiid is going to be like this, and he's going to stay like this throughout the course of the year and going into the playoffs, which with a good coach who recognizes it in Nick Nurse can guide him through that and pull that out of him when necessary, this can make the Philadelphia 76ers the most dangerous team, and it can legitimize Joel Embiid for capturing a second MVP award. Anyway, man, great show this week, man. A lot of good conversation to be had, and hey, man, we're just gonna keep it moving. You know what I'm saying? KIM all day, every day.
Yes, sir. And another amazing episode in the books here, and we have something really special cooking up for the next week here or two. So stay tuned, rather, if you will, to the baseline. Really, really excited about, the content that we're bringing to you all as our fans and listeners. So stay locked in with us. As always, follow us on IG at NBA_baseline or on X at NBA baseline period. Follow my guy Game Facely or me at Shaw Sports NBA. We love y'all.
Absolutely, man. For the baseline, Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.